Are we in there? Everybody in there? Can you hear me? I don't know. We'll have to see if this is actually working. Uh-oh, we've got the darkness and the light. I think it's okay.
I'm so sorry.
It's all right.
I just don't want to...
Are you there? All right. We've got some people joining. Got to make it a little bit higher, and that's fine. And then we're not in the bright. It's really bright outside. Hi everybody. Sorry, we had a couple of technical difficulties because we're in a barn. I don't know if you can see, but we're sort of in this really cool teaching barn, part of the, there's Tasha, part of the Rahu University. Out here we've got the beautiful foothills in San Luis Obispo, just expanding on forever and ever. And we're just going to be doing this Facebook Live thing. So we're going to see if people sort of start figuring out that we actually are here again. We had a bunch of questions to start out with, and I thought, hi everybody. I have a lot of hellos coming in. That's really fun. All right, so we just want to, answer some questions and try to make this so that it's not all tilty, but I think it's fine. Okay. So, answering some questions and seeing what kind of things you've got going on in terms of, I know you've all been, most of you probably have seen the documentary Pet Fooled and understand what we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about food, we're talking about the industry, we're talking about a lot of the things that are just misconceptions about food that just, we should know better. We should, if we don't know better, then we need to start paying attention and learning more about it. So a lot of the things that people ask me about are specific disease conditions in animals and what we do about those, because that's one of the big things that veterinarians are worried about, like how are we going to deal with an animal that has kidney disease, and what are we going to do for those types of animals. And the issue with all of that is that the first and most important thing for us to do is always pay attention to the species that we're feeding. So if you know what you're feeding, if it's a fish, if it's a bird, if it's a dog, that you're going to be feeding it the most appropriate food to keep it healthy. And that's what the body's going to need. The body needs all of those things coming in and saying, okay, I'm going to support all of these particular functions in this body. And once you've done that, then you deal with different disease conditions. The biggest problem is most of the diseases we're talking about have at their basic root the fact that we're feeding them inappropriate foods. And so that's one of the things that makes me a little bit crazy when people say, oh, you know what, I really have to feed a specialized food for my cat that has kidney disease. Part of the problem is that all along we've been feeding a dry food that ends up contributing to the kidney disease because it's causing inflammation, it's not moisture appropriate, and it's not really giving the cat what they need as an obligate carnivore, the moisture, the protein, the fat, in order to avoid kidney disease. So that's one of the things one of the questions that I got a whole bunch of questions about, how do you deal with these different diseases if you're talking about a low protein kidney disease? Like, well, we don't really want a low protein anything for a cat, for example, because they really are obligate carnivores and their body understands what to do with that protein. So, and low protein from the standpoint of what we're doing now would end up being actually really crazy because a lot of the pet foods at the moment, a lot of the cat foods are already way too low in protein. So you decrease that even more and you're causing a bigger problem. If you take what a cat maybe normally needs and you have like an end stage kidney disease, all right, well then you can go a little bit more to a lower protein than the highest protein they would get so that you can give them a little bit more to work with. That's end stage kidney disease. But in general in kidney disease, I don't really talk too much about low protein in cats. So, and I feel the cats that, in my practice, that are on really, really moisture appropriate foods, they do terrific. So one of the things that we're seeing for, let's see, one of the questions here on the kidney stuff was, raw diet for cats and kidney disease. How do we deal with that? The biggest problem, I think, a lot for a lot of the cats is that they'll only eat what they'll only eat. So you have to sort of make sure they are eating first. You have to try to feed them. It took me a year to get my cat to eat raw food. So if your cat is not already eating a raw food diet, that may be your biggest hurdle. And then once you've gotten your cat to eat the raw food, well, then you are in a better shape. You can manage their disease. You can deal with a lot of the issues associated with kidney disease, including things like phosphorus. I have worked with the Darwin's Pet Company to formulate a kidney support diet that is a raw food specifically for, dogs and cats. That food has in it chitosan, which helps to bind phosphorus in the food so that it doesn't develop too much in the system, into the bloodstream, so that you're not having too much phosphorus in the bloodstream, which is one of the things that kidney disease animals have a problem with. And that's one of the things that makes them feel sort of nauseated so that they won't eat. So you're going to want to make sure that you are feeding a food that is biologically appropriate, and then maybe dealing with the issues that are associated with that particular disease. I really like dealing with animals with kidney disease with adding things like bone broth or some of the different meat soups and things like that, because if you can do a good bone broth, you get more moisture in, you're getting electrolytes. That's some of the problems with kidney disease, is their electrolytes get wonky. So all of those things can actually make a big difference. Okay, we've got a lot of people saying hi. I saw Vermont, I saw Germany, I saw, so anyway, hi everybody. All right, so we are, if we're talking about the kidney disease, let me see what else I've got on here. A lot of veterinarians are not necessarily going to agree with this, because we have been taught as veterinarians that we should be doing a prescription diet for kidney disease. One of the biggest things, one of the people here asked me about the dry prescription diet for kidney disease. If you just think about dry food for cats in general, it doesn't really make sense. It's not going to help. You need moisture appropriate food, and particularly for kidney disease, that's one thing we really need. So I would make sure that you are feeding a moisture appropriate food, and really thinking again about the animal that you're feeding. They would expect to get most of their moisture from their food. They do not expect to be having to drink or do things like that. They're desert animals by nature. So they wait a little bit too long before they drink, and so you'll have problems with them letting themselves get dehydrated by this dry food, which, as we all know, one of the things you need with kidney disease is appropriate, hydration through the body. So let's try to keep that on target. So you have to always balance everything on here. Let's see, need to remember that phosphorus needs to be in balance, not only with calcium, but also magnesium, vitamin D, and vitamin K. Yeah, K2. Sorry, I can't, my vision. Totally true. So this is part of the deal. A lot of people are still, when we say raw food and when we're saying, to try to feed things that are more appropriate and more fresh, we're not talking about unbalanced foods. I'm never talking about an unbalanced food, because unbalanced foods are one of the bane of most nutrition, people that really care about nutrition. You really do want it to be balanced for that species. It's knowing what the balance is and what's right and wrong and how to do that appropriately. That's what really matters. So just having calcium and magnesium and the vitamin D balanced alone, but still having an inappropriate moisture food or a kibble, high processed food, all of those things, to me, that's not the answer. And unfortunately, that's sort of the answer that we get from veterinary medicine. And what we need to get is, we need to get foods that are fresh and balanced. And that's really what we're looking at. And so a lot of the food companies out there that are doing this, they really make a difference. So, again, I work with, the companies to try to help them make a better food, keep it really balanced, but also keeping it as fresh as possible. So when I'm doing the kidney, support diet with Darwin's, it's because they make an excellent base food with really good appropriate ingredients, really, really digestible meats that are not going to be meats that are, rendered from something or high heat processed, or, if you've got these really beautiful ingredients, you don't want to dull them down by processing them. The main reason we do a lot of processing with some of these meats and rendering the meats is because they're in such bad condition when we get them. So we have to make them into something so you wouldn't recognize the fact that it came from something, that was stuck on the road or has been in a field or dead from odd diseases. We want to have meats that are in the really good form, and we have those appropriate, so the body goes, oh, I recognize this. I know what to do. I'm going to make health. I'm going to fix my own body, and that's what animals can do. So you really want to allow the body to have what it's appropriately made to have. So, all right, so some of the other questions. So someone was asking about blood testing to adjust diets. Honestly, I do feel like blood testing is appropriate if you know you have a disease condition. Then you should be periodically checking to make sure that you're doing appropriate things and you're keeping the body on target. If you're talking about having an animal blood tested for certain, and so that you end up changing things like magnesium or potassium or things like that, what you really need to do is just first make sure that you are doing a completely balanced and appropriate food, and really important to have the biome of the body in there helping you digest, with helping the animal digest. So the biome has to do with the bacteria in there and how well that's absorbing, because you can keep testing and say, oh yeah, I'm low again in magnesium, or I'm low again in these things, but it's really because you don't have the right acid component in the stomach and you can't absorb the magnesium properly because you've been giving Pepsid all along or something. So knowing what is really, you're getting foods that's really digestible, but knowing that the biome is appropriate, that you're, maybe even giving something like, goat milk, or a really good probiotic combination, or some tripe, frozen tripe. Those things can really help the GI tract get it together. So if you can do those things, get the biome to digest and absorb the appropriate nutrients, you should be in better shape and not have to test all the time. So yes, you can do a lot of testing for different nutrients. There are things that you can do to do testing. It depends on where you are in the world. I mean, I know we're sort of international here, so getting those tests sometimes can be really expensive and difficult. I think the first line of defense is always just pay attention that things are appropriate in the body, and that you're getting the biome correct and not doing too many other supplements to try to make that happen. I'd prefer to do it naturally rather than doing a lot of supplements and things like that. Home cooked food, people ask a little bit about home cooked food. There are some good diets, and again, home cooked is relevant in the fact that you really shouldn't necessarily have to cook, which is fun. You're going to put it together. So homemade is really the better answer. And a homemade raw food, if you're getting really good ingredients and you're not buying them from places where you don't know what the sourcing is of those meats, that's going to make a difference. You want it to be really good quality. Again, get beautiful ingredients. And one thing I'd really like to stress to everyone around the world is, when you're talking about feeding a pet, and particularly a dog and a cat, you're talking about, we're talking about feeding pets that are going to be fed by other animals, right? So we're feeding them animal products, and that's what you really need to do. And those animals have to live a healthy life. They have to be taken care of. I don't want them to suffer their whole lives so that I can feed my dog. That doesn't make sense to me. I'm an animal lover. I mean, everybody here, you all animal lovers? We are. We want to love the food animals that feed our animals. So there should be some way to make those animals' lives better, and make sure that we're appropriately paying for them, we're appropriately getting them, when we're not allowing our pet food industry to support an industry that is making animals suffer in feedlots or living in small little cages and things like that, so it's cheaper to buy these meats. We need good quality meats with healthy animals. That's going to make a big difference. So easiest way to improve a dog diet, I know that's a couple of times I've seen that. If you do have to feed kibble food, and there's a lot of reasons why many people have to do that, again, try to choose a kibble food company that you can find at least tries to source well, or things like that, or doesn't high heat process. If you can do that, that helps. But then you can add something just as simple as adding sardines. If you add sardines a couple of times a week, even if it's 3-4 times a week, absolutely add sardines. You can add some fresh food. If whatever you have leftovers, you can do your leftovers, and leftovers are amazing. Again, if your leftovers aren't Twinkies and things like that, right? So you don't want to be feeding a lot of carbs or things like that. You want to be feeding really good quality things. But you can mix those things into the food periodically and keep them healthy. I really do like the bone broth as an addition to, if you're feeding not a perfect diet, that helps a little bit. And then also being able to feed some tripe, or feed some, goat yogurt or goat milk, things like that. So I think that can make a big difference. Organic, absolutely. My family has an organic farm in Michigan, and it's really important to me to know that we're not adding pesticides and other things to our foods, and it should be the same for our pets, particularly because they're eating this food every single day, all the time. So you don't want to be adding in things that are going to be full of pesticides or other trouble, because then what are you dealing with? Then you're adding other disease processes into the animals. So, the Roundup or the glyphosates in there, those are really, really strong metal binders, and so that you end up with your enzymes and a whole bunch of other things not not working well if you're ingesting a lot of those chemicals that are herbicides and pesticides. Absolutely, we need to keep those out of the diets. So, what other questions did we have on here? We had diabetic dogs. Yeah. So again, disease processes. A lot of diabetic animals, cats and dogs, a lot of that has to do with diet. And so I really do believe you're starting out with feeding foods that are really low in carbohydrates, and they're going to be high in protein and fat. You're going to want, as an animal gets older, you're going to want to be even increasing the amount of calories that they get from fats, and even decreasing a little bit of the calories they get from proteins, because that helps keep the body in more of that ketogenic state that can heal things like, chronic inflammation, autoimmune diseases, and can really help with diabetes and things like that. I know people say with diabetes, you're worried about ketones. That's true, but the main thing you want to do is you get ketones from two ways you can get ketones in your body. One is when you're just digesting your fats, and that's one way. And the other way is if you've got too much blood sugar going on, you've got a lot of high blood sugar, you'll get high ketones in your body. And that's what you want to avoid in the diabetic. So you're getting rid of carbohydrates to bring the blood sugar down. And that's an important point for diabetics. So you're going to want to get rid of carbohydrates, and then you're going to want to be focusing on a high protein, high fat diet for the animals that are diabetics. Slowly working into all of those things with any animal that's sick, making sure they're eating every day and getting the appropriate food that they need. When you have an animal that is on insulin and you're changing the diet from a higher carb to a lower carb diet, you want monitoring. You want a lot of monitoring, because you can actually create a situation where you may not even be needing so much insulin anymore. And that becomes a life-threatening problem, although if it's monitored well, it means, that's a good thing. You make them healthier, they don't need their insulin. So you're going to want to be very careful decreasing the carbohydrates so that you monitor the blood glucose in the body. So have a veterinarian who's on board to help you with that. All right, so what was the other questions here?
About pancreatitis.
Pancreatitis, okay. So pancreatitis, a lot of people say, again, that they're associating pancreatitis with high-fat diet. It is not as clear-cut as that. So pancreatitis to me, and actually what we've seen clinically, is it's really associated a lot with a high carbohydrate diet, making things unhealthy, affecting the body's ability to produce the appropriate enzymes and what the pancreas is doing, and how all of those hormones play together. So it's really important to get a biologically appropriate diet and slowly working your way into a diet that's, again, low in carbs and with an appropriate amount of fat and protein in there. If you can get the biome healthy again, you can get away from pancreatitis. I have a lot of cases that have pancreatitis as historical pancreatitis, and they're saying, "Oh, I can't feed high-fat diets. I have to be really careful. It's going to be a lot of this. I add a lot of fiber to the food. I make sure they're having plenty of fiber, which is indigestible carbohydrates. So you make sure you've got that, which will be psyllium or something like that, and then you end up paying careful attention to amounts that you feed. You don't want to be feeding too much, because that'll end up overworking the system. Keeping it as a really minimal calorie amount as you're getting them used to a diet, and then making sure that probiotics are in there as well. And then watch the carbs, and then you have a better chance of dealing with pancreatitis. Puppies. Yeah, balanced diet for puppies. It is it's one of those things that everybody struggles with a little bit, particularly when you're dealing with the raw food diets, because the raw food diets are they're not carb heavy. So you have a puppy who's bouncing all around the place. That's how they are. They're all kinds of energy, and they need sort of a faster source of energy. So some of those puppies, we will talk about increasing and sort of making them a little bit more dense in terms of diet, where we'll add something like some sweet potato or pumpkin or things like that to give them a little bit of grounding, because otherwise they do tend to be really thin. The fact is, thin dog tends to be a little bit more of a long-lived dog. So if you are feeding really appropriate foods, that's good. But puppy diets, they do need more fatty acids. They need a better complement of fatty acids to make sure their brain is functioning well, for you to actually train them better. So it's really useful to be increasing the fatty acids. So for me, when I'm dealing with puppies, I'm saying, make sure you're doing a really good omega-3 krill oil or fish oil, something like that in the diet. You're adding coconut oil to the diet. I even tell people, go ahead, give some butter. You've got some extra bacon grease, you can do a tablespoon of that. Give them a little bit more fats, and they tend to hold their weight a little bit better. And then you can just make sure they're doing a really good raw food diet, so they get used to that. Their body stays really healthy. My Labrador right now, was on a raw food diet from 8 weeks on, from weaning on, I mean, he's an Adonis. He's just as gorgeous and energetic and crazy as can be. But that early diet, I know, helped him a lot in his development and keeping himself really healthy. So appropriate diet first, watch how their weight goes, make sure that you're dealing with really good fatty acids, and then you're going to start seeing some of these companies, and I know we're working again with a couple of the companies to make raw foods that are going to be specifically staged for different stages of development. So I know Darwin's is going to be doing a specifically puppy food so that we have fewer problems with that fast energy need of the puppies. But yeah, you'll see that.
There's also a question about feeding older pets.
Feeding older pets, yeah. Older pets, interestingly, what we're finding with the older pets is it's really useful to get them to stop being in sort of more of a regenerative phase. And one of the ways that the body does that is if you do, we always keep the carbohydrates really low because we're dealing with carnivores. Again, if I was talking about hummingbirds, this would be a different conversation. But we're talking about carnivores, so we're going to keep the carbohydrates really low, but then we are going to increase the amount of calories that they get from the fats. Again, that will help them a little bit in terms of keeping away cancers. We're going to be having at Rahu, the Royal Animal Health University, in October, we're going to be having an entire weekend on dealing with sort of this, the longevity and cancer diets, which are the things that we want to end up turning on the body's ability to fight those things. And the best way to do that is decreasing the calories a bit. You're going to decrease calories a little bit. You're going to increase the amount of calories they're getting from some of their fats. But again, highly digestible proteins, keep them really healthy, keep their muscle mass on, things like that. So it's a cool thing. So we are going to be talking about that. Somebody said this. We've got some secrets coming out. Yeah, we do. We do have some secrets coming out. But we want people to pay attention to diet in general, and we're going to be seeing some really interesting information. I think in September, I think we're hoping for a release of a documentary that's going to knock your socks off. So you'll hear that from Rodney Habib.
What do you think about freeze-dried food?
Freeze-dried food. All right, so freeze-dried food, sort of same deal. Freeze-dried food is a lot of the freeze-dried raw foods. They're useful. I wouldn't use them as a main base of diet, really for a couple of main reasons. One is it's not moisture appropriate. So I'm always talking about, people always say, oh, water doesn't matter. Water matters. Water matters in the way it is, in what it's doing to the structure and form of the food. Water holds all kinds of different electrolytes. It's sort of a holder and a grabber and a carrier. And so when the body sees this food, you want it to go, oh, I recognize this form and structure and I know what to do with it. So water isn't just like water. We can take it out, put it back in whenever we want. I know if you go out to dinner and you order food and then they bring you a little dry, hard, pellet, and you say, wait, I just ordered, salad and broccoli and potatoes and things, and they give you that, you'd say, no, oh no, just pour your water on there. You're fine. That's not really what we want to do, because it isn't really in the form that the body's going to understand it. Does it give you the nutrients that you might need temporarily? Sure, totally great. So when I travel, I'll do some freeze-dried raw food. When I want a really strong flavor for something, like I need an animal that's sick or having some trouble eating, I'll sprinkle some raw food on top. I'll use it as a treat at my clinic all the time. I use those as treats because I want the animals to love me, because it makes it easier for me to do good exams and get better blood work if they're happy and thinking they come in, they get a little really delicious treat like that. So the freeze-dried raw foods are very useful. I use them a lot. I don't use them as a main food. The other thing is they're super expensive. Just the amount in a bag doesn't really ever, it's going to not be as cost effective. So I would like moisture appropriate foods to really lead the day when you're talking about diets. So
there was also a question about kidney dog who's not liking raw food very much.
Yeah, kidney dogs that don't like raw foods. There can be some trouble with that. So sometimes we will do things like we'll sprinkle some of the freeze-dried raw over the foods. I have an entire little handout that I give out to animals, like kidney disease animals or animals that aren't used to raw foods. Different things that you can put on the top to make it more palatable. So even things like Parmesan cheese, or using your sardines, or using tripe, or using goat cheeses. We use bacon grease. I pour hot butter over the top. Julia Child loves that. Julia. And then you can do things like that to enhance the flavor and making it warm. So I'll throw it in the oven, cook it a little bit, make it a little more smelly. Do not use a microwave because it takes the smell away usually. So I would do things like that, or cook things in a pan nearby. Use butter and maybe cook a little bit of meat and just put that over the top. If you get the smells of cooking in the air, that does help a lot of even for animals that have kidney disease or other diseases that dulls their sense of smell or makes them a little nauseated. If you can just overwhelm that a little bit with something really delicious smelling, that could be really useful too.
People are also wanting to know about pork, feeding pork. And
yeah, I'm not a big fan of too much pork. The main reason I'm not a big fan of too much pork is that I don't feel like it's usually ever sourced very well. So the pork foods, when I was in vet school, they make you work in a whole bunch of different places, and I had to work at a pig farm, and I think I cried every day. So most of the pork, the way that it's raised in this country, makes me very sad, and I would just be really careful about who is getting the pork, where they're getting it from, and sourcing it. They're really smart animals, and just like our cows and chickens, and we shouldn't be sourcing from that. So I'm not a big fan because I know that they're usually not sourced very well. In general, you can feed pork. Again, I do. For me, it's always free range things like free range and pasture raised animals. So free range, I guess, is a relative term because a lot of people say now if you say free range, it just means they've opened a door somewhere, but they don't know how to get out. So that's not good enough. It should say on the packaging that it's pasture raised or grass fed. So those are things you have to pay attention to. Somebody did say they thought that raw food was too heavy for a little dog, yes. Or little dogs, should they eat raw food? It's like, yeah, they should, because it's a dog, right? So this big, it's a dog, and this big, it's a dog, and they really have the same genetics throughout their body. I mean, if they've got a liver shunt or they've got other things, yeah, okay, maybe you've got some issues there, but I would say you have to just remember you're feeding, a canine, a carnivore. They should eat the food they're meant to eat, not because of their size really, but because of their genetics and who they are. So absolutely you can do, I have so many raw feeding, tiny little teacup dogs, and they're super cute. And they love their food and they're really happy and they live forever. It's really great. So, all right. And allergies. Then what else do we have? Allergies. Oh yeah. Well, so a lot of people say, what do we do with allergies, right? So big topic. We will be having an entire Rahu weekend on allergies next year. So allergies for me it's always like thinking about, it's like dealing with a cup of inflammation, right? So you have this big cup and you have to figure out how to empty the cup, because when the cup gets full, then you're going to start to see allergy signs. So I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, what is in my cup of inflammation? Well, okay, so first it's, guess what? Goes back to diet. So we always want to decrease on anything that's going to cause inflammation in our cup. So the food the animal eats should always be a low inflammatory food, so anti-inflammatory foods, and that really is getting rid of a lot of the carbs, making sure the fatty acids are appropriate, and that you're feeding a really well-sourced food that the body knows what to do with, so it's not going to be inflamed. So once you've done that with the food, you'd be surprised how many of these chronic allergies, and I get a lot of people who say, oh, my dog has chronic allergies. I can't change the food because I can't afford it, but I'm going to the allergist. I'm having allergy testing done. I'm getting special shots. I'm doing all this. I'm like, back up. Go back to how much money are you spending on veterinary bills versus how much money are you spending on food, and switch those. Start to spend more money on food, on really. You still there? Mm-hmm. My mom is calling me. Tell my mom to get on Facebook. Sorry. All right. So. If you switch around and just think that you need to be really thinking about spending more money on food really than you do on veterinary care, although, I'm a veterinarian, I do want you to come on in and get exams and make sure we're doing the right things, but you should really be thinking about that. And so that's one thing. Change the food. Once you've changed the food and you still have some allergies, which happens, then we start talking about things like, there's a couple of saliva tests that you can do, but most of the saliva tests that are out there that I think are really good I think we use those more to convince people who are feeding the wrong foods, like if they're feeding corn or feeding wheat, we do the saliva test. It's like, oh look, they don't tolerate corn and wheat very well. Like, okay, well you guys who are on here, you already know this, right? So we're not going to be feeding those things. So really what you're going to be looking for are thinking about the other things, what you can do something about, and then do something about it rather than you don't have to spend the money and test for it necessarily. If it's Kentucky bluegrass and walnut trees, maybe you can't take that out of your yard, But if it's something like dust mites, yeah, clean more often, get some filters, things like that. So there are things you can do for a lot of those allergies. You can't do much for pollen in the springtime because it just is out there, but maybe you can do something for the cup to get rid of inflammation in some of those things that you're doing. And then you do things to add to the body's ability to fight inflammation. So turmeric and nettles and all those fun supplements that people do and put in food, those are great ways to get rid of inflammation in the body. And you can have little fun food supplements that help with inflammation and allergies. So yep, you can do all of the testing, but you don't necessarily always have to. I would say, make it happen with food and appropriate supplements. I do like, I like feeding not as frequently. A lot of people say that they do like to feed more frequently for certain animals. I mean, we're talking about just frequency of feeding. If you have a dog that's, over 20 pounds, I have no problem feeding that dog once a day. And they tend to stay really healthy if they sort of get all their food once a day, and then they actually can get a little bit empty and heal their GI tract when they're empty. So the tinier dogs can have a little more trouble with that, so you may have to feed more often, or if you have other disease issues like liver shunts and things like that, maybe you'd have to feed more frequently. But the frequency of feeding can really help them even as they get older. If they're having little incontinence problems, or having problems with when you're waking up and you're having poop in the bed or something with these older animals, or they're having trouble with incontinence from drinking a lot. A lot of times if they're eating once a day, their drinking goes down, they don't fill their bladder as often, and they still stay healthy, and they do really well with that. So dehydrated foods, I think we talked about a little bit already, and there's a lot of different kinds of them. But again, we're really trying to don't take beautiful ingredients, process them, and then try to make them beautiful again, if you can avoid it. If you can't avoid it, okay, then you got to do that. Try to choose the best sourced food that you can do, to keep your animals as healthy as possible. So, there's a lot of animals that, that do much better if they get really appropriate, high quality, fresh food. So most of them are going to do that.
A lot of questions about, how to feed specific pets. One question here, do I need to feed organs in addition to muscle?
Yeah, so people are talking about what types of things they need to put into foods if they're going to be doing that. So, and then we do, I just do another one for autoimmune disease.
Yes,
that one. Things that you put into food. So there's should you put organ meat and different things like that into foods? The general answer is, yeah, it's really useful. Obviously, if an animal, the sort of perfect food for a dog, take a rabbit, put it in a blender, and that's what you feed your dog. And it ruins the blender, but still, there you go. And that gives organs, and it's eyeballs, it's brain, it's the connective tissue, it's all that stuff, and they'll eat most of it, right? So that is true. You need to have all of that in there, but just sort of knowing, does that just mean I'm going to put liver in the food? Am I just going to put heart in the food? They bring different things, so you have to know what you're feeding and what you're putting together. And the issue is really there's also even a difference between a rabbit that's just a wild rabbit versus rabbit meat that you're going to buy at a grocery store. There is actually a difference. They had a big difference for they had a difference between chickens that were indoors versus outdoors. The vitamin D3 isn't there. So those are all really important questions of what you're putting in and how you're doing it. So liver is going to bring a lot of copper, or different organs are going to bring different things. You have to actually balance the food and then know why you're putting in each thing, not just sort of randomly putting in different foods. Remembering, of course, also that if you are going to be cooking and making your own foods for your animals, it is good to vary. It is good to do sort of different recipes and pay attention to how you're putting things together. I know there's a couple ways to use, like Steve Brown's diet formulator to help balance diets. That's what we do a lot for my clients. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, but you have to know what you're feeding so that it is balanced. So. All right, and then we have questions about the autoimmune diseases. Autoimmune diseases, yes, autoimmune is basically the body's own immune system attacking itself. And there's a lot of conditions that are considered to be autoimmune diseases right off the bat. You've got autoimmune, anemias and autoimmune problems with joint problems. But then there's other conditions like thyroid problems and even sometimes kidney disease or liver diseases that are also autoimmune diseases. And autoimmune diseases, like all the other things we're talking about, really start with inflammation. And inflammation has to do, really a lot with what you're feeding. Are you creating inflammation in the body by feeding the wrong foods? And then can you do supplements and things that bring the immune system into a better regulation and check? And the immune system is going to be responding to things really, based on what it's exposed to. And if you're constantly triggering the immune system, not just with diet, but also with weird chemicals, with over-vaccination, with toxic chemicals topically on them for flea and tick control, all of those things are like, the body's going, this weird stuff, I have to react. And people say autoimmune diseases, oh, my animal has an immune system that's really low because it has an autoimmune disease. It's like, no, it's actually been overstimulated, and so it's reacting and attacking things it shouldn't react to. So one of the most important thing to think about with autoimmune diseases is making sure, again, you're doing this anti-inflammatory diet and most fresh, normal things, so the body just looks at it and goes, I understand what that is, I'm not going to react to it, I get it, that meat's in the right form, that the magnesium's in the right form, I see vitamin K, I can understand what it is, it hasn't been processed, hasn't done anything weird to it, we haven't added a bunch of chemicals. And the same thing with your, try to minimize on vaccines or do none. If you really have a bad autoimmune disease, talk to your veterinarian about being able to not have the vaccines and get a waiver for that. It's against the law to do that with the rabies vaccination, but everything else you could do stuff with. So you want to pay attention to the vaccinations, you want to pay attention to flea and tick medications and all of that as well. And that's going to be a big helper for autoimmune disease. We see that a lot.
Question about cats and fasting. Should they?
Cats and fasting. We're not really, so there's sort of a couple ways to look at cats. A lot of people say, oh, you know what, my cat's a nibbler and eats all day, so I'm just going to leave the kibble food out all day and the cat just nibbles. If you think about cats in general, are they nibblers, really? I mean, so think about cats as a species. They go out, they kill a mouse. Do they nibble on the toes, leave it for later, get to the knee, maybe later, and then they're going to have like a little bit of, something from the front? No, they're not nibblers. They will eat that thing. They're not like dogs even. They don't really cache things so much. They eat fresh food, and that's what they do. They're obligate carnivores. So obligate carnivores are really amazing because they're just looking for the freshest food. They're looking for the freshest meat. They're going to eat it right away and be done with it. Cats really are not nibblers. So they should basically, my cat gets fed twice a day. And the fact is, there's definitely times when I'm gone for a long time. A lot of people have cats because they know it's easier to manage, so they can be gone for 12 or 16 hours a day. They've got a litter box, they've got all that. They can just leave food out for them. And that's true. And I will do that sometimes with freeze-dried raw food and things like that. But in general, you can feed a cat twice a day, and they do really, really well. That's sort of a little bit like, saying, okay, we're getting a little bit of fast because their metabolism's really quick, so they're sort of empty for a little while. I don't think cats do really well with fasting otherwise because they tend to do this thing with their liver where they'll get fatty liver disease, and you do have to be super careful with that. I am interested to see what research comes up with when we are feeding them really appropriate diets and we work on, what happens with fasting in cats. But for the moment, my medical advice for people is do not fast your cat, because I've seen them get desperately ill when they're a little bit overweight and they fast and then they sort of start to metabolize their liver, and that can be a life-threatening problem. So, no to fasting on cats for the moment, and maybe forever, I don't know. But in general, they're also not nibblers. They shouldn't be eating all day. They can have 2 meals a day, and that helps them too if they're overweight and things like that. And appropriate food, again, not kibble if you can avoid it. So,
The only other thing,
yeah.
there's a lot about that.
I know everybody wants to know brands. It's tricky. I feed a lot. I can tell you what I feed my animals, and I do. I feed my animals Raw Bistro and Darwin's both. So I mix and match. I like the Darwin's because it gets shipped directly to my house, and it's a great company, and I know it's really fresh. I love the Raw Bistro because I think that company has done such a great job of sourcing. Their food is really great, and it's easy to find in different stores now. They've come out nationally. There's a bunch of other products that I also recommend and use based on where people are and what they can buy. So that just happens to be what I feed. But if there's a lot of new companies out there that have really great, well-sourced, good foods. It's just getting to know them. You can talk to, don't buy from a big box store and expect to really get information back about those foods unless you really do know, have a way to connect with them. You want to buy from a company that you can call up and say, hey, I just really want to know, like, what's your sourcing? How's that going? We need to help ourselves. We need to help our environment and our world. And we're an army of animal-loving people. We can change this industry ourselves. So don't just, say, I have to shop, it's something really big and I have to buy the most available food. Try to help good companies. Let's try to support good companies. So if you live in a place, and I don't happen to know about that food, but you found out that it's a really well-sourced food and it's got a really, well-balanced, things in it, and it seems to be meeting all of the needs, support that company. Do it. So I would say that's what we want to do. We want more companies that we can trust, not just the few that we know about. I really want more competition out there, more fun. So
maybe just one more.
Yeah.
Steve,
Yeah.
A question about Steve Brown's formulator.
Yeah.
Where to access it, or is it accessible?
Yeah, Steve Brown's formulator, I think there's a few more veterinarians who are getting his formulator. I know that I do. We have a method now to, analyze certain diets and do that through my clinic. So if you want to contact us, you can try it that way. And our email is royalvet@rtvc.us. So you can certainly try emailing us if you've got a complete diet with exact measurements in grams. We need all of that if you're going to have us analyze a diet, but we can give you that information. I know, evaluating diets is something that it can take a while. It's a lengthy process. So just to do individual clients' diets is one thing. We have also companies that come and we evaluate diets that way. Probably an easier way to do it is to just get a good diet and try to get one or two really nice diets. I know that a good starting place for a maintenance adult dog food is probably on YouTube right now. You can get the Rodney Habib's easy to make homemade dog food. You can look online for that one. And then I think also Steve's got his own website availabilities it's dietformulator.com. So you can look at to see if you can reach him directly. I know he's trying to scale back a little bit, so I don't want to put him under the gun. So, all right. What else we got? Anything else that I didn't cover? We're talking about, don't forget our microbiome, right? Don't forget that you need to make sure that your GI tract has lots of good bacteria, things like that in there.
Flea and tick and heartworm.
Yeah, I know. A lot of people want to talk about the flea tick heartworm because it's important, and it's one of these issues that's a really hard one to tackle because, so heartworm disease, we're starting to get up some new protocols where we don't have to do the heartworm medication every month, where we can actually test for the microfilaria in the blood. And if we do a testing every 2 or 3 months for looking for the microfilaria, if they don't have it, you don't have to give the medication. So we're seeing about those types of protocols. You can talk to your veterinarian about whether or not they're thinking about doing that or looking into it. Doing heartworm medication every month may be too often. So that may be something that we want to look into. So asking questions is actually a really great way. If you're out there and you're not sure, ask questions. Just start asking. Talk to your veterinarian, because the more veterinarians that start getting questions, the more they're going to look into it. So that's one for heartworm disease, and it depends on if you've got a lot of mosquitoes in your area or not, whether or not you need to be doing that, and how high the heartworm prevalence is. So there's a lot of things coming out about that. The other thing is the flea and tick. So again, pesticides, no, right? So, I have a lot of different ways to get rid of fleas and ticks. I can use nuclear weapons to get rid of fleas and ticks. It's just not a good idea. We know that's not a good idea. So we've got pesticides out there, and they'll get rid of the fleas and ticks, but if you can avoid doing it as a regular protocol, absolutely avoid it. Don't put those topically on your pets. There's a reason why we don't put it topically on us, because it's dangerous. So we just don't want to do that. So I would absolutely try to avoid using those, the topical pesticides and oral pesticides for your pets. If they say that they're totally safe, I don't know how they're saying that. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So that's the deal there. There are some natural, remedies for this. Essential oils work great for fleas and ticks. and the reason I say they work great is because we're developing a ton of resistant fleas and ticks out there. They're resistant to the pesticides anyway. So we're seeing a lot of breakthrough even when you're using pesticides, which is a disaster. So if you can use essential oils, there's a bunch of different great essential oils, Only Natural Pet, Mercola, they all have a leave-on once a month essential oil for fleas and ticks. And then there's some sprays that you can use as well when you're really sort of in the thick of it. You spray it on and just sort of munkle it around. And the essential oils, they smell good. You know, it's actually a lot nicer than the stuff you feel like you have to put gloves on and not touch.
There was a specific question about how to nourish the microbiome.
Yeah, so how do you nourish the microbiome? And one is really trying to avoid oral antibiotics is one. We do so much with oral antibiotics and we need to really stop. Particularly if you've got an animal that has skin problems, ear infections, things like that, that are just, they're right there, they're topical. Try to see if you can talk to your vet about doing a topical preparation of something so it doesn't have to go in the mouth, through the GI tract, killing all the bacteria, and then getting to the place where the infection is. Try to really think about common sense solutions. When you've got something right there in front of you, get a topical on top of it. Use something like, a combination. If it's an antibiotic, fine too, but you can use Manuka honey. We were just talking about that today with one of the horses out here. You can use Manuka honey, you can use essential oils. I know if you dilute out in coconut oil or the coconut oil is tricky, sometimes it makes them want to lick themselves more, so beware. But we will, if in places where they can't lick, you can dilute out a lot of the essential oils and put those on topically. I use a lot of those. I'll use oil of oregano, and it really helps. It's antibacterial, it's antiviral, it's anti-yeast. So there's a lot of other ways that you can avoid antibiotics. So if you can avoid antibiotics, that's one. And then two, you want to nourish the microbiome again with probiotics, prebiotics, making sure you're giving plenty of fiber, things that the bacteria can eat that are natural, and then making sure you're feeding appropriate food. When you're feeding your animal appropriate food, that nourishes their biome, so that's one. And then also feeding things like tripe, which is intestines. It's smelly. Green tripe is sort of the way to go. I personally think it's disgusting. My dog would like to eat it and roll in it and bathe in it. So, but it's actually really, really a good way to sort of refluorinate. If you have an animal that really chronically has GI problems, has been on a lot of antibiotics, has never really been that healthy, maybe has a history of Giardia or something like that, I would look into a fecal transplant. So we do a lot of those where we take healthy dog poop from a healthy animal that eats raw food, and you do a little bit of magic in the back. If, like we do it at my clinic, I have a protocol for that if people need it. And then you basically give it as an enema to your dog, and it refluorinates the GI tract. So that's something else that can be done as well. So, all right.
And that's maybe...
How are we doing?
I think about it. Dogs with cancer, how to feed them.
Oh, dogs with cancer. Dogs with cancer, it's becoming more common, and I will tell you, I guess I'm not going to give everything away because it's complicated a little bit, but it's weird. It's this complicated, simple. And the more I look into nutrition and health and all kinds of different chronic diseases and life-threatening diseases, the more I think it's just feed appropriate food. It gets easier and easier. However, dogs with cancer, one of the most important things is don't feed carcinogens. So you may not know that every time you're feeding a kibble food, it's high heat processed. If it's it's 90% of all kibble foods are high heat processed. That creates 2 potent carcinogens. So if you've got carcinogens in the food and you're feeding them every single day, what's going to happen? You're going to get cancer, right? So don't feed those every day to your animal if you can avoid it, and that's a big one. Aside from that, we're really going to be talking about the digestibility, giving the body what it needs to fight these cancers, and trying to turn on the body's ability to fight by having this ketogenic method come on board. That's tricky because there's a lot of things that you need to pay attention to in the dog to get that to happen. So you'll have to wait to hear a little bit more about that from when we do the weekend in October at Rahu. So that's Rahu. You can contact us at rahu.education or info@rahu.education, something like that. If you want to sign up, you can look us up on Facebook as well. So Rahu is Royal Animal Health University. So excited about it, I can't even say it. So we'll be teaching and we'll be bringing lots more information to you. So with this, the people that we've got involved, the people that made Pet Food Cole, big shout out to you, buddy. did a great documentary. All the people that have been helping us with Rahu, all the people who are on the forefront of making a difference for pet health, we're going to keep bringing those people to you. We're going to bring them through Rahu. We're going to be making more, things like this and being as open and as practical and helpful as possible, because it's hard out there. I know the internet is a scary place to go all by yourself. So we're here to hold your hand. Okay? Take care.
Awesome.
See you around the neighborhood.